Ken, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It
How
was
you
a great
doing?
delight when you called, and I appreciate it.
Oh, I appreciate you coming by and doing the show. I've been looking at the work you are putting up lately, and
Mhm.
it's stunning. You
Thank you.
started off in mobile, correct?
I did. As far as coding is concerned, I moved to mobile when I moved to iOS. Before that, I was working in ActionScript, if you can believe it, in Flash.
Holy
And
cow.
before that, I was doing 2D design in Photoshop. And before that, I was doing audio, video production, and some music production, and photography and drawing for the most part.
So do you have a background in art, or did you have an interest in art as a kid?
Yeah, absolutely. From when I was 7, I think I knew I wanted to be an artist and stuck with it for whatever reason, maybe a lack of other ideas. So from that point, I went to art college, got a degree, and then got into teaching adults, working with a community art center, doing audio and video production. And we had always had computers, even from high school, the old pets, if you can believe it. My parents invested in a VIC-20. My brother got a C64. I spent many hours going through pages of programs, trying to figure out where they had made a mistake, or myself coding
Yeah.
games. And so professionally, when I was into college, I got seduced by digital tools. And after I'd entered the workspace, I got interested in trying to code because the portal of interactivity was something that offered another potential for narrative that I was very interested in. And when mobile came along, there was the opportunity to create almost a more intimate communication loop between the audience and the device. So it drew me there.
That's really cool. Yeah, I'd say if anything, it was maybe as an artistic spirit that it was an overabundance of thoughts and imagination that led you to the art world. Are you hearing anything about the NFT art boom of late?
Oh, definitely. When that landed, the first thing that connected with me was the idea of ownership and copyright, and especially resale, which has
Yeah.
been missing from the artistic world across the spectrum, music and fine art, literary works, perhaps. And so when something like that comes along, I tried to think of a scenario that I could express it in. And I came up with the idea of a speakeasy. That's both an art show and in the daytime, a low chill kind of coffee bar situation. At nighttime, it turns into a speakeasy with DJ music, and artists can meet patrons and communicate with each other, that kind of thing. And to try and delve into NFTs, that was my vehicle for doing it. It's just useful to have a project-based learning program, I guess, when it comes to NFTs.
That's really cool. So are you helping people launch, learn what's mint? What's sort of the driver?
At the moment, what I have is a venue that I've plans for in terms of being able to make it a space that other people can go who aren't plugged into the commercial system. And I'm about a month away from trying to put forward the technical solution. So my background includes programming, but I'm mostly a generalist. So the technological part of it, I think, needs to be partnered with someone who's established. And I've looked at who's doing things very well in that field. And I think it's more likely that I'll need to figure out a way to compete rather than cooperate, because I think there's something vital and alive in trying to work your way through a solution. And if it fails, I can always connect with someone who's smarter than me on the NFT side.
Yeah.
But in terms of the overall vision of how it fits in, that's very, very clear to me. So I'm going to focus on that.
I was talking to another guest, and they were doing collaborations with physical spaces, but in this
Mm.
instance, it would be galleries. But having a central location, what it reminds me of is the old school Parisian parlors, where everybody would come together and share ideas.
Exactly, exactly. When the pandemic started, I had returned from Prague, and I'd lived there steadily from 2007 straight to 2013. And from that point was going back and forth. And those sorts of salons do exist. Where I was living, around the corner down the street, there was an actual absinthe salon, a proper one with real absinthe that you
Wow.
sit and you sip gently, and there's art on the walls. You go through to the back room, and very regularly there was a salon that was a presentation of poems and music and artwork. My Czech is not fluid, so I could only catch parts of it. But it's just being in that ambience in a European country really fulfilled that notion of trying to be present in a salon situation.
The first time I had proper absinthe, it was for a guy's birthday party,
Really?
and he poured some, and he's like, look, this is your first time, I'm going to go ahead and cut it.
Mhm.
And I was like, come on. He's like, just trust me. So sipping, we're hanging out, we're talking, like, all right, guys, I'm going to go hit the head, I'll be right back. I stand up and my knees wobbled until I caught myself. I looked like a freaking slinky. And then I stood back up, and there was this line in the center of the rug that led to where I needed to go. And I followed that like I was a kindergartner walking from the classroom to the cafeteria. It was crazy, but it was a very cool experience.
Oh, that's very clever UX design for an actual space. Very thoughtful
Yes,
too.
absolutely. So it seems like everybody that gets into VR has, or AR has, this moment where they have an experience and this light bulb goes off and they're saying, this is the thing. Did you have something similar for yourself? Like, what was the
That's an
jump?
interesting question. Um, in my case, I'm actually on the autistic spectrum. And my early life as a kid, before I could speak, I think, or just at the edge of that, had a lot of visual imagery and things that I was translating into narrative in a way. I know it sounds preposterous, so I'll give an example. There'd be a storm outside, and I'd be a kid lying in my little bed, and there'd be a tree bouncing against the wall, the window. We've all seen that. But in my mind, that turned into this kind of Pacific Rim combat between a giant tree monster and a giant piano monster.
Cool.
And I could play a bit with which one was winning, which one was kind of pushing back a bit, and choose the winner in the end. And we create a visual narrative. And part of my development as a person had to be how to understand that language and how to interface properly with the real world, which is a common autistic problem. So when VR and AR landed, I was familiar with it from the 90s. I attended SIGGRAPH in the 90s, but it was very primitive then. And now we're getting to potentially game level graphics, which is much more immersive. And at this point now, when the pandemic landed, I stopped working in iOS. It wasn't so much an aha moment, more like at last, and a jump into
Nice.
the breach
Okay.
moment for me, because it
So
matched the potential for immersion that I'd experienced from a young age.
in what out of that immersion was sort of refreshing to you?
Actually, the first time I tried VR directly after SIGGRAPH, which was in the late 90s in this case, was with a girlfriend who had a Rift. And she played the demo for me of the dinosaur, walking down the hallway. And I knew how it was generated. I knew it was an illusion, but my heart rate still elevated because of the size and the motion and the perspective of the experience. And I think that's what confirmed to me that this is something that would be significant at even that level. And we see now during the pandemic that it's been useful for managing loneliness, managing pain, increasing the ability to retain what is learned in educational scenarios. So many applications. I hope that answered your question.
It does. The technology, that immersion, is mind blowing. What what do you want to create? What's pulling you right
Mm.
now? I'm seeing your work. It's beautiful. Where were you wanting to take it, at least for now?
At least for now, I'm very interested in trying to pitch in with the notion of education, of expanding boundaries, of ambitious learning in that sense, because with VR, you can replicate to some degree a real environment. You can synthesize an imagined environment, all of which supports a mood or inspires a mindset. And from there, you can begin to examine objects in a way that you can't really in the real world. If you select anything around you, even the simplest item, let's say a leaf of grass, you look at it, and on our visual level, you can see it's green, you can see some detail. We know from school that it has a certain structure to it. But in VR, you can actually dive into this and see its vascular structure, see how it respirates. To an atomic level, you can see how chemical compounds combine to create what it is. And I think there's a potential in that space to lead people into maybe understanding or recognizing or being inspired by the real complexity of what's around us. And I think at this particular point in time, where we're dealing with an almost 16th or 18th or even 19th century pushback against knowledge, I think this is a creative way to maybe present these subjects.
I like that. I was having a conversation with Bracy Smith, and he was talking about how important it is, even more important, to create excitement about learning rather than you want to get to the education. But if you can create the excitement, then people will want to be lifelong learners rather than it being this horrible grind that you have to go through for the first bit of your life. And it sounds like what you're creating, pulling people in. There's a film company, and they start off in the subatomic, and then it zooms out and they expand into the universe before the movie starts. And that's always been interesting to me. And so what you're talking about is very appealing.
That's fascinating. And I'd like to know where that takes you in terms of mindset or mind space when you see that powers of 10 effect.
So it's expansive. It's very hard to imagine infinity, and on a microscopic, eternally small, moving into negative numbers or expanding into the infinity of the universe. And when you can grab some sort of visual like that to understand how huge the subatomic is, as well as your being able to understand the context of size within the universe. I love when people do scales. I'm seeing TikToks where they show this is this planet versus this planet versus this planet versus this galaxy versus this nebula. And I love that because I don't personally have a frame of reference, but being able to visually experience that, even in a 2D way, is exciting. So when you're talking about pulling me in, holy cow, that changes the game.
That's exciting. And when you talk about atomic space and the size of atomic space, the mental image I had was both, it's obviously imperceptibly tiny, but also imperceptibly vast. In space, there are molecular models of hydrogen or molecular modes of hydrogen, for example, spread across the universe. There's nothing that's actually empty. And as you describe this, the connectivity that you describe is inspiring. Yeah, I agree.
The pulling off of that, thinking about the concept within quantum mechanics of superposition and the idea of two particles being connected, no matter how far or no matter how much distance, and one affects the other and vice versa. That's powerful. But again, hard to imagine. And if you could be in a virtual reality environment and here's this one thing connected to another thing, and then all of a sudden you shoot across out away from the earth and the moon and through the solar system and out of the galaxy and on and on and on and on, and then have the the one that shot away vibrate and see that reaction zoom back into where earthbound, it gives a good experience. And it's that emotional connection with education, with what you're learning. We talk about it all the time, do what you love, but sometimes that can be difficult to experience, especially if you lack resources, et cetera, and don't have an opportunity to travel the world or get a super solid education that exposes you when you're trying to eat and survive. So
Exactly.
there's a range, but if you can democratize it through a digital experience that creates that emotional connection, game changing.
I agree. I also think to build upon that, that genius is everywhere. So a family that is struggling to feed itself isn't thinking of this technology, maybe has a cell phone to be able to conduct business and banking and email communications. They may have a son or a daughter who is a genius, technically or engineering or what have you. And all of that is being overlooked because we're very focused on the commercial side. It's all concentrated in other parts of the world. So what would happen if there were access to education and experience and these inspirational models? How fast would that take off? What would happen?
It's probably my favorite thing about the internet
Mhm.
is that access to that information. Being on a cheap Android phone,
Mhm.
you're in the middle of some village and you see people with their cell phones. They may not
Mhm.
have running water, but they have a cell phone
Mhm.
and they can get access to banks, but they also have access to Wikipedia. They have access to
Mhm.
lessons. They have access to the world's information. And when you, the more people you put online, the more access to genius you get.
Mhm.
Before that, that genius would have died and we wouldn't have known. Now we can have a million Einsteins connected to the internet at once,
Mhm.
sharing information. Even in the behind the great firewall over in China, they're
Mhm.
pushing out into the rural areas to educate and find those geniuses and bring them online. I mean, it's very important and it's powerful.
Mhm. You remind me of an anecdotal story I'd heard about an instructor who had embedded a computer or laptop into a wall. And what had happened is that there was a young genius who understood how to use it to access this information. And that young genius turned it into a community effort where he'd teach others. And so, in some senses, perhaps the internet, which perhaps was meant to be a resource for all, but is turned largely into a commercial effort in our environments, is showing its true potential in these environments.
Mm. I was listening to a podcast today about because there are barriers and but you
Mhm.
do I love because humans there's humans that I mean you want to capitalize. We all have bills to pay, 100%
Yeah.
get it. Um, and you have humans that help others overcome those barriers. It can
Yeah.
be a mentor, it can be a leader that just carves out a path of that gives you a safe environment in which to work. But then on the NFT podcast, people were running into for new artists that may not have access to 50, 60, $200 for gas fees.
Mhm.
They're creating nonprofits that will help budding artists access the potential of what NFTs and blockchain can embody. So I love that idea.
Exactly. Thank you. There are always going to be new generations of creators, especially in the music space. The competition is high, the barriers are high, and I'm hoping that this environment will provide a means to distribute and connect, which is the real issue.
You mentioned being into music. Have you seen or been attracted to anything that's happening with music plus technology?
Yeah, Travis Scott. I don't follow the genre so closely. I hop from one genre to another, but I've watched his concerts in Fortnite on YouTube. I didn't experience it directly. I think 8 times now. It's exceptional because it has all of that weight and rhythm and beauty of a solid identity in music. But it's also this shared experience. And beyond that, there's an artistic choreography to it that really stood together. It had creative elements, mini narratives, surprises. I just loved it. And I thought that really showed what could be done, but it's also still just one aspect of what could be done. It's still within a particular mode or model.
Yes.
I think the palette is infinite.
Agreed.
And the people will have the brush and the pigment. Let's tie that up.
You're reminding me of a conversation that I had with Raphael Brown, and he did the Lil Nas X concert, and he was able to draw from the Fortnite Travis Scott experience, but he did his with Roblox. And he was talking about those experiences, and you build for console because it's you're going to get your money. You're going to build for mobile because of its reach. You want to build for VR because of its immersion. You want to build for AR because of its comfortability. And so you build a thing, you do a good job in one experience, and you figure out how to build the next experience and connect them. That democratizes the reach and allows the person to choose the experience that they want to have. Maybe they don't have time to go and put on a headset, but they can look at their phone and have that experience. And he's hyper focused on customer experience. And so what you're drawing from that really aligns with what he said, which resonated with me. So that's really cool. What do you think? Have you had any inklings of, because you've watched it 8 times. So what were some of the thoughts that you had that really stood out? And what were you thinking as a creative? What else could be done?
Okay. I take that as a really broad question, and I like broad questions because you have to choose your path through the answer to make sense. I think the broad questions have to do with what's going on personally. How much can a person dedicate to focusing on the experience? What do they need in that moment? Do they need peace? Do they need agitation? Do they need inspiration? Do they need to see novelty or something new? So in terms of where it can go, I know there's a focus on being able to be present in a metaverse sense on all of these mediums. But with a person as a fine arts background, I also very much appreciate what this gentleman had said about doing it well in one space and then progressing to another. But taking that path doesn't mean that you can't map out where you want to be in the end. So where does it go in the larger scope of things? I think the palette, historically perspective speaking, switches from a 2D canvas that's presented to the world, and if you select to get to see it, to an immersive canvas that people almost have agency within how they participate with it. And I think that's far more powerful than chat or holding your cell phone up at a concert. The chance of immersion in real life or through a cell phone or through VR, I'm hoping will get us to consider, see how the metaverse affects our perception and how we can widen it. I think the effect will be possibly wide ranging, but it's going to be slow and subtle because, as you say, we have other responsibilities. We have to pay the rent, we have to look after our family and the rest of it. But the scope of experience and entertainment, I think, will be exciting. I'm not entirely satisfied with that answer because there are so many directions the question can go in. But I'm glad you asked it because we really are talking about an immersive ecosystem.
What do you want here's another broad question for you. What would you like the metaverse to be? Right? We talk about it as the people that are in the space, for sure, they want a better environment. My concern, this is the first time I've verbalized this, actually. I was listening to another podcast. Ashton Kutcher, the actor, was doing an interview. He's a big time tech investor now. He's really active in the space. And he said something that resonated with me about social media platforms, which went against what I heard someone else say recently. The first person said they didn't want to be on social because they didn't want to contribute to platforms that cause societal problems. I was like, okay, good. That is 100% your freedom. Ashton Kutcher said, and this really clicked with me, feel free to push back, is that it's not the platform. The technology is neutral and allows for democratic expression of thought and speech. It's human society that turns it into what it is. You know, when Microsoft released their chatbot on Twitter and it turned into a racist Nazi that was super angry, that wasn't the AI, that was the humans that fed the AI. So what do you think about that?
I agree and I disagree. I agree completely with AI as it's programmed being reflective of what a group of people were putting online. I think that these people that are espousing racist views and non-inclusive views are loud and annoying and to almost universally idiotic. But they find a keyboard and Twitter to be a useful vehicle for that. So we hear it over and over and over again, and that feeds into AI. With Mr. Kushner's quote, I kind of disagree and I kind of agree. I agree that technology is thought of as a neutral platform. But Facebook, for example, or shall we say a social media platform, apparently to me as an outsider, appears to be designed for ad revenue as well. And it seems possible in the 2016 election in the States, and I'm Canadian, that if you have enough money, you can create 100,000 different targeted ad platforms to reach a tiny microsegment of audience. And at what point does the platform cease to be a neutral stage for people to espouse their views? How much support is there really for what society really is or really can be? Yes, society really is systemically racist in many areas, but society is also very kind. I experienced some essential kindness myself not a few days ago from strangers. Beautiful thing. I hear this from, I don't want to actually.
Okay.
But I had a moment of need and someone, a stranger came through and was very kind about it.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it really is, especially because both as an autistic individual and working in this field and under or previously under lockdown, spend a lot of time by yourself. And it's easy to forget this. So we'll see where it goes. But that led me to think of the potential of what would a rebel metaverse look like? Or in my own little brain, what would Bowie do?
Nice.
What would be his attitude towards these things? So that got me to thinking that a rebel metaverse would be something that I'd like to see or actually build, where people can go to treat it as potentially a more neutral platform. But how do you avoid falling into these same traps? I think if it's an artistic endeavor, it's almost easier to do because you have some distance from it. It's its own little thing. There always will be loudmouths, but there always will be many, many more kind people, intelligent people, cultured people, caring people. And that inspires something in the receiver, who then can pass it on.
Do you think, and here we're going to spitball and speculate because we're all in the middle of seeing this thing grow. Is it the universe, the metaverse, and you have worlds or islands, and that's what is the true hedge against an isolating platform that can be counterproductive? Because people seem to really like TikTok, say, and there is ad revenue, but you have young people who have mastered the platform and get their first great job, and there's people that spread really great, cool, uplifting messages on there. I dig the platform a lot. You have Twitter Rage, and they've done what they can. You have Facebook taking data, and but you have people that don't seem to mind it with Instagram for whatever reason, and you have that debate going on there, et cetera, et cetera. But within a metaverse, and you get to build a rebel world, and I build the Eh-chev-ah-REE-ah world, and et cetera, we then get to form communities and determine how we want to come together, exclude, include public areas, the whole thing in a lot larger area. Does that help us at all?
I think it's a strange tension between a commercial effort and what people pick up to use, especially a younger generation. My younger brother used to work with, let's say it was TTY or something online where it was text only. And it's the younger generation that made something of Roblox and TikTok. But on the other hand, those platforms are available to them because of the commercial backing that goes into making it distributed and accessible. So that tension kind of plays back and forth. And then the question becomes, if you extend that question through time, will one of those talented people create their own platform in the future? So maybe the metaverse is almost like a multiverse where pocket universes come and go, except this time we're creating or adapting or instigating or letting evaporate these various metaverses.
I really dig that concept. And maybe, again, spitballing here, if you're building on the blockchain, providing both visibility and encryption, right? You protect and democratize. Maybe that concept, building a metaverse on that backbone, or multiverses on that backbone, maybe that helps us get to where we're going. Not sure. That's the first time I've really kind of had that thought. What do you think?
When you describe that, I think it's almost like blockchain are our clay tablets. It's our inscription of Gilgamesh in these early stages of what the metaverse will be. And 100 or 200 years from now, this may be lost, but there might be an inscription or a record, if those records remain and can be read, of how the origin began. Or if we go further and extend that 1,000 years, which is really almost getting into the realm of science fiction, but not entirely implausible. Will the blockchain then become that sense of sea scrolls where we had started, depending on how our civilization progresses through how much the metaverse is taken up, how much it transforms us, how much of our society is dedicated to programming the blockchain or participating in it on a technical level, which will then alter what their lives and their families and their daily experiences will be like, both as a programmer and as a user. Where does knowledge go? And I'm sorry, I'm a science fiction nerd. Does knowledge become sentient? So to bring it back to the present, blockchain, I think there's value in being able to create something and have it live or fade away. Blockchain manifests something as a record, theoretically forever. So what do we dedicate to blockchain that would have that sense of memorialization? And what do we create spontaneously to let live or not live, or develop or not develop?
That's a challenge for me. I'm in love with being human. Every aspect of it, warts and all, the dark and the light. And how else do you learn if, as things disappear? I mean, just look at archaeology and how much those scientists are spending time laying on boards in a covered space with a little tiny brush, trying to figure out some connection to our past. And what if the Library of Alexandria hadn't burned down? Don't know, but maybe we would be further along in our knowledge as a species than we are now. No clue. Um, but for it to
And
not disappear, um, there's a marketer, maybe you've heard of him, Gary Vaynerchuk, and he talks about as we become more interconnected, we'll be forced to have less judgment because we're going to see those warts and all. Everybody's going to have done, or somebody's going to have done everything. And it won't be just one person, it'll be a group of people. And we'll have to become way more empathetic to the different, to the weird, to people who were abused and grew up angry, to poor people who don't understand money. And you're like, why can't you get your act? All of it. And we're to the rich people who had terrible childhoods and why they're distant. Everybody's going to be forced to have empathy. And maybe with the brain computer interfaces, that'll really push the issue. So I don't know, but I mean, I do like privacy and I want things to disappear. So there's a tension even within me about which way to go.
When you talk about the scope of understanding the human condition, I think that's what you're describing in terms of being able to have space in oneself to understand where someone's come from a difficult background or a poor background or a culturally different background. It's easy for us to make assumptions about anything because we need to get through the day and survive. But it's also intensely valuable to us as a society, and I think increasingly as a species, as our problems become world-sized and our population grows and we're interconnected, to try and look at things from the other angle. So if we were to think of implants and blockchain and accessibility, to be able to assimilate all of that in a naturally human way, we also need time. I think we'd need time to reflect, time to understand an almost meditative aspect of being human. We're able to just sit for a moment and let these issues kind of work out in terms of feelings or memories of sounds or images, and then come together. And those may play out in dreams as well as a form of sorting things out. So whether or not we have implants, there has to be a space for time for people to kind of put together what they've seen and experienced and learned. So would technology change that? I think that social platforms and technology and our communications in general have given us an opportunity to be stimulated constantly through cell phones or through desktop or what have you, through movies, music, and media. And those can also be distracting influences. And I think that that makes it more difficult to synthesize the experience of being human. And the less we're out and amongst other people, that's also another important level of connection that's taken away. So, I love this question because there are so many important aspects to discuss. I think the overarching narrative is that of a human condition. Where do we make space for that? And putting together what we've experienced to be human, as you say, even if we have implants. And where is privacy to be able to do that?
Yeah, it's both individual and communal, isn't it? Where we need time to reflect on ourselves, and we need time to reflect in groups. That could be with a partner, with a friend, with a class, with a work community, as a state, a nation, and as an entire global species, to be able to have that dialogue.
Yeah, but I wholeheartedly agree with you. There has to be space for everyone, imperfect as we are, because we're still works in progress.
I'm curious, here's a question for you. Have you thought about communication within the metaverse, right? So right now we're trying to figure out, there's this concept coming out of religious studies about the divine polytuma of giving everybody has a democratic voice, but not everyone has the same level of authority within their voice. And we have this, we're seeing it now, where we're trying to figure out who do we mute for how long, who gets the blue check, what are we elevating and what are we making disappear. And I'm curious, I haven't even thought about it until now, what even, there's got to be some sort of impact that the metaverse will have on communication. I know we're seeing some of the same bad behaviors translate on Twitter. Was seeing there were women talking about male avatars trying to grow up their female avatar within the space. So we're still having meat space behaviors continue through, but there still has to be some sort of alteration, but I'm not sure what that would be.
When you describe that, I think that whatever is passing out to the blue badges or blocking or muting, if a person is blocking or muting others, they're really blocking or muting their own personal filter bubble.
Yeah.
And that will in turn change what they see, which will in turn change what they react to. But those are based also on algorithms of convenience. There are people who are dedicated to, from what I've read, I don't know directly, who are dedicated to kind of policing forums or policing the technology, say, within social media platform, to block out the worst of it. Because as human beings, there are a lot of people that have the worst of it or create the worst of it. But on the strata that we exist in, that's generally algorithm based. And so algorithms begin to shape what we're presented with and what we're seeing. Filter bubbles again. Metaverse, I hope for a bit of chaos within the metaverse. The early Earth was chaotic. Early life was riotous in its variation, trying to figure out solutions to survival. If we think of metaverse, if it's heavily directed and heavy with algorithmic use, then to what ends will that be put? Usually, typically commercial ends. For communication, it's important to hear who the idiots are so you can respond to them. But then on the other hand, idiots seem to be drawn to the platform. The metaverse with its self-presentation of avatars, for example, there's some sense of you being there in human form. And it's a little bit closer to trying to say something ridiculous to a person in reality. Are you really going to almost literally stand there and say something inflammatory or stupid or silly just to, feel like you have a bit of power? Because you're right, so many voices don't have power. And I think some of the voices that should have more power have learned to be cautious in what they say, even if it's righteous, because of pushback.
What about what we're seeing with like Me Too, Black Lives Matter? Like what I'm seeing, and again, pushback, but what I'm seeing is, especially after or because of COVID, and we're all in our screens even way more than ever before, that we were seeing a rise because the attention was there of subjugated, quieted, abused voices that are striving for more power. I mean, there's still quiet voices, right? Black people are having a good moment, but not necessarily brown people or indigenous people, but there's still growth there. Women are definitely having a moment. GLBT, or maybe GLBQ, is having a moment, kind of sort of T, but not really. There's a lot of pushback. So we're still in that flux, but I do see a rise in access because of the internet for the silenced ones that allow, I feel like the tech democratizes access at this point. We're getting there.
Yeah, I agree. We are getting there. I recall during the pandemic, it was said that a lot of people were flocking to self-improvement. They were going to libraries or searching for lessons online, for example. And I wonder if what you described is a reflection of that. The timing was intense. If we recall, we're all under lockdown. BLM took center stage as it needed to. Because as I believe one person had said, that house has been burning for 400 years. Here in Canada, there's discovery of the remains of people who didn't survive residential schools. So yeah, I'm glad these voices have a space to speak, because we all got to become more human and confront these questions of control and authority and voice.
I saw
and
that.
I think with,
oh no, go ahead.
oh, thank you. I was just going to add, with the internet, we have the addition of a rainbow of colors. So there's another dimension to what we're seeing: more spirit, more humanity, more almost artistic reaction in these other sectors you've mentioned. LGBTQ, I think this is the best I can do to describe that.
I saw with the schools and the graves. I read about that up there in Canada, and this is kind of goes back to why I like the idea of blockchain. And I don't know if this is an unpopular opinion or not. I feel like people don't want it to be, but maybe I'm just being, hard on myself. But what we consider aberrant or horrific today was okay in the past, and vice versa. Like, being gay was a mental illness, and we're like, okay, no, that's just not the case. And so it's become normalized that if you speak out against human beings just because of their genetics or love choice or whatever, that's horrible. And we've come to agree about that. Rape, pillage, and murdering used to be the way to do things. That was A-okay, no problem. Not today, right? And there's going to be things that we're doing today that I would hope, I want us to evolve to where we get to the point where we look at what's happened or how things used to be or how things are, and not judge the shit out of it, and go, here's where we want to be instead, and here's why, and allow the collective voice of humanity to make that decision together. And we can push down or we can raise up as we evolve. But hating people for how they used to, it doesn't allow for healing if you look in our lifetime. Or we want to deconstruct to the point of hatred and anger, which doesn't help us in the present, and those people are dead, and just maybe just understand them for where they were at in their context. It lacks empathy. So going back to that empathetic idea of minimizing judgment and just let's try to get to where we want to be. It is. And it's funny. So often it's just this community. I think I'm going to be talking about tech, and we do, but I really think it's just this community. We often talk about the human impact.
I think that's important, because if we're really at the early stages of creating something significant with the metaverse, we could extend that out hundreds of years. And what effect is it going to have? Our dedication to creating this on a technological level, and how does that begin to program us? I know it's a bit of an Asimov idea, I think, but they're important questions to consider. To push back on that a little bit, these problems were created typically by small groups of people as part of a larger organization. And I'll use the example of what I experienced growing up in Halifax. Halifax had an historic community called Africville. And in the 60s, through extremely racist policies, these homes were literally bulldozed and torn apart. The community church was destroyed on land that was granted a few generations before to ex-soldiers and I think maybe traders who supported Canada in times of war. But their actual official, as far as I can understand it, their official certificate of ownership was never actually received or processed. Now there's some reconciliation, but in the 60s, all of this was happening, and they were taking these people out of their environment, out of their ownership of their land, on the backs of garbage trucks. So we can say that yes, well, we have to let go of some of our responsibility in terms of our particular race who is involved with those ugly policies, but the effects of that decision, for example, are generational. And I don't think it's fair to people who grew up with parents and grandparents who suffer that loss to kind of dismiss our participation as representatives of that lineage. But at the same time, I also agree that I wasn't alive when that happened. I went to school with kids who were children and grandchildren of primary families on that land. And there was anger, there was frustration, problems, all kinds of things that I didn't understand at the time, but I have a better understanding of now in context. And so the best I can do, I suppose, without looking like a fool, is to say, consider the impacts, take responsibility, and listen, and go from there.
So we're in agreement 100%. So I don't want to stop having current day empathy, right? So with like here in the United States, there's definitely a legacy of slavery and the burden that has put onto the Black American community. And we need to recognize that, and we should do something about it, whatever that looks like. Definitely. My dad was first generation American. He had such a hard time being half and half. I've experienced my own issues, but I can either stay pissed off or I can go, don't love it. Okay. Let go, recognize, heal, and then do something about what I can do today. Because if I stay pissed off about yesterday, it's gone. I can't do anything about it. But I can do something about today to impact what tomorrow looks like. And so that's kind of where I'm at.
That's momentous. Relates a little bit in terms of being an autistic individual, trying to figure out how people connect, being a white kid in a mostly Black school, and then a white kid in the mostly white Catholic school. But I can't relate to what an experience would be such as yours from a different ethnicity, not race, ethnicity. But I want to listen. And if I'm angry about what I experienced, as you described, and as I was for many years, what is the choice? To turn towards tribalism, like apparently we're seeing in the States, can inflame that and ignite that, because where else is the power? Or do you take a moment and try to become introspective? How do I transcend my own upset to be able to then become an agent in improving things, or at least in terms of being able to listen, and talk and connect. What are we missing?
Yeah. Unfortunately, anger is galvanizing. Maybe going back to what you said, being present with the person in the metaverse or group to group in the metaverse, maybe that changes something. And I wonder if maybe what we're seeing with the groping, maybe it's, well, one, we can code for that, I'm hoping over time, or have a user level setting. maybe part of it. I mean, it's definitely a sickness coming out of the meat space, but it's if it's something's cartoony versus real, photorealistic, I don't know. But maybe.
No, you're onto something there, actually. If I could
yeah,
little rudely jump in.
Shoot, let's do it.
In Canada, we grew up with the NFB, the National Film Board. And a lot of really compelling concepts are described through animation, 2D animation or stop motion or other styles that can approach these issues sideways. And it's easier to do that even in primetime TV, like The Simpsons, for example, where you can take on some of these issues, talk about them almost directly. But because it's animation, there's a buffer between reaction and thought and entertainment where something can happen. With a metaverse, maybe it's less about avatars and more about what kind of other artful communications or narratives or documentaries people manifest to express these questions and problems and pains in 3D space. That'll become the real ingredient.
I like that. It makes me think of video games and how you put little signs and symbols to guide, and maybe as we create this new environment, we can build to increase health, mental health, societal health, etc., relational health. Ken, this was,
I agree 100%.
Awesome. This was super surprising. I was telling you at one point that I think I'm going to have these super technical discussions about, what's being built and where everything's going. And so much within this community turns to where are we at? Where were we? How do we think about it? What are we building? Why are we building it? Who are we building it for? What do we want it to be? And it was truly a joy to talk with you, man. And I really want to do this again sometime.
Likewise, Robert. Thank you very much. This being my first podcast, I was a little bit nervous. That all goes to the wind as soon as we start talking. It's great to talk with you, and I hope we do it again.